I'm Matt Sargent with ABC Acres. If you've been following along for a while, you might have noticed that we've discussed some of our favorite plants, and we're going to continue doing that. And when we talk about our favorite plants, we're generally talking about why we like them so much and ways that you can propagate them so you can have even more of them if you have them on your property, or if you don't want to make a big investment, you can buy one, propagate, and fill up the landscape. That has led to some questions though, so our next couple episodes, we're going to do a series about the various propagation techniques. We're going to start with softwood cuttings. They are the easiest, generally the most successful, and the fastest way to get plants. That said, it's mid-October in Montana. This is not the time of year to be taking softwood cuttings, so we're going to be playing with some willow because I need to prune these anyways, so it doesn't really matter. And bear with me, because really willow you can propagate just by cutting and sticking it in the ground. You don't need softwood cuttings, hardwood cuttings, anything like that. Cut it, stick it in the ground. But basically, when people refer to softwood cuttings, if you're watching a future or past video and I'm talking about how you can propagate aronia, for example, from a softwood cutting, they're talking about this year's growth. The fresh growth, generally the time of year in the northern hemisphere to take softwood cuttings is in late May or June, depending on what growing season you are. You want the vigorous new season's growth, and you're going to take a sharp pair of pruning shears or a knife and you cut it off. And that's your softwood cutting. Technically, this is still a softwood cutting, even though it's the wrong time of year to be taking it. And since it's willow, it will propagate. So that is how you take a softwood cutting. Now let's look at how you propagate them. All right, before you take your cuttings, you're going to want to make sure you're ready to get them potted up. So you're going to want pots or deep trays full of a rooting mix, which is generally a combination of peat moss and perlite. Was this industry standard. I like to use coconut coir and coarse sand. The key is you want something that'll stay moist but is porous and will let the cutting send out roots. Depending on your setup, you're going to need stakes in a plastic bag or a humidity dome that's large enough for your cuttings. Or if you're doing hundreds or thousands of cuttings, it's worth your time to invest in an automatic misting system that will keep the humidity in an ideal place for your young cuttings to root. If you're only doing a few at a time, this is a great setup. So once you take your cutting and you're getting ready to root it, you will also need a rooting hormone. We're going to pretend this is willow tea. If you want to learn how to make willow tea, check out episode 28, Rooted in Nature. I'll link to it at the end of the video. But you can essentially make a rooting hormone tea out of willow plants, which is why we like to have willow on the farm. But so you're going to take your cutting, you're going to strip the lower 2/3 of it of leaves, and if it's a broadleaf shrub or plant or herb, you're going to take half of the leaf off. With these willows, that's going to be really hard, and you don't want to watch me do that. Once you have prepared your cutting, it can also be beneficial if you have a sharp knife to remove some of these nodes. Just make a little scar there. Not necessary though. You're going to take the bottom end of your cutting, make sure you have a nice clean cut. You're going to dip it in your willow tea or rooting hormone, and then I like to use a stake to make the holes for my cuttings. Put the cutting in the hole and then gently firm up the soil around it. All my other cuttings have already been prepared, so I'm going to stick them in the hole and then tamp around it. Make sure that the potting mix is nice and moist, and then put my humidity dome on my pot. And if you're using a plastic bag, this is why you have the stakes. You don't want the bag coming into contact with the cutting. At this point, you're going to leave it in a partially bright, not direct sunlight area where it's warm but not hot. So partial shade, and if you're using a plastic bag, take it off for about 5 minutes a day to let it breathe. In 2 to 4 weeks, you should have roots. You'll know this is rooted and ready to transplant when gentle pressure won't let you pull it out. That means that roots have started to form. Don't check it by yanking it out. It is still tender. But once it is rooted and you up-pot it, you can plant it out, or you can keep it potted up for a season and plant it out next year. Thanks for joining us today. I hope you learned something. If you have any questions or comments, we always love to hear from you. And let us know what's going on in your farm. Until next time, happy growing.